law under the IT Act. This effectively means that you will have to ensure compliance with the IT Act and the various rules and regulations that have been made under the IT Act. Now, remember Mahabharata? In Mahabharata, there's a Gita discourse. During the Gita discourse, Lord Krishna gives one central message to Arjuna. Lord Krishna says, "Come to my Sharana and I will protect you." The Indian IT Act has an exact same message. It says, "Come within my ambit as an intermediary and I will guarantee you that no harm will befall upon you. I'm going to give you a Suraksha Kavach, a statutory exemption from legal liability. And that will only be given to you provided you comply with the IT Act and rules and regulations, and provided you exercise due diligence while you discharge your obligations, provided you do not conspire or abet in the commission of any offense, and provided once you're called upon to remove or disable access to any information, you do the same expeditiously without vitiating the original electronic evidence in any manner whatsoever." So as an intermediary, I'll encourage all the startups in India to actually take the benefit of the statutory exemption from legal liability given to intermediaries under Section 79 of the IT Act, which has now been upheld by the Supreme Court. But the problem is, while the Supreme Court has upheld this, I find a majority of the companies and startups in India are completely ignoring this provision and are non-compliant with the provisions. So they do not come within the ambit of taking the benefit of the statutory exemption from legal liability under the IT Act. And that, I think, could be a very costly mistake in the coming times. You are a startup today. You could become big. You could hit gold. But then if you haven't done your homework, you will be exposed. And your criminal liability and civil liability will always be on. Now, your question in your mind, if I'm a startup and I don't comply with the provisions of the IT Act, what happens? This is a wonderful question because Indians love to subscribe to the Indian Jugaad school of management. And they believe that they can do any Jugaad. But mind you, if you don't comply, you must be prepared as a startup for two kinds of legal consequences. Number one, you can actually be sued for damages by way of compensation up to 50 million Indian rupees or 5 crore Indian rupees under certain circumstances, and for unlimited damages by way of compensation under those circumstances when you have neglected in dealing, handling, or processing sensitive personal data. Similarly, there could be exposure to criminal liability. You could see that your top management could be sent to jail for cyber crimes that are punishable with imprisonment ranging from 3 years imprisonment to life imprisonment, and fine ranging from 1 lakh rupees to 10 lakh rupees. So in this ecosystem, I don't think that's a good idea to subscribe to the Indian Jugaad school of management. It's much better that you comply with the IT Act and the various rules and regulations. And mind you, the government has been coming up with various rules and regulations, including in the year 2011 and also in the year 2021. Look at the 2011 rules on startup. Like other intermediaries, a duty is imposed that you will have to report for cyber incidents and share information related to cybersecurity incidents with the certain. We find that the certain has come up with a statutory notification which says the moment you become a victim of a cybersecurity breach, you must mandatorily report the same, otherwise it actually becomes an offense. So earlier times we all used to not report. Those days are now gone by. Today, you will have to mandatorily report or face consequences. 25th of February, 2021 is a golden marked letter day in the history of Indian cyber law jurisprudence. This is so because the government of India has notified the Information Technology Intermediary Guidelines, Rules 2021. So consequently, we find that these rules have become mandatory and have to be mandatorily complied with by all intermediaries, including all startup companies. If you don't do that, then there is a problem. And you see that differently. There are some companies which are hesitating, and ultimately companies are saying, okay, let's comply with these IT rules because there is no other option available in this regard. So we find all the big companies complying with, so startups have to also mandatorily comply with. You don't comply with these IT rules 2021, and let's look at the learnings of the Twitter case. Twitter chose not to comply with these rules, and the moment their statutory period for compliance came to a close, and they didn't comply, they became exposed to criminal consequences. 4 FIRs have been lodged against Twitter in various states, and in each case they are now required to go ahead and fight those criminal matters as we go forward. So under these new rules, what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to have your rules and regulations, your privacy policy, your user agreement, and that must elaborately detail what you are wanting your users not to do. For example, you will want your users not to upload, post, share, modify, or transmit any information that belongs to another person, or that's defamatory, obscene, pornographic, pedophilic, invasive of another's privacy, that's harmful to a child, that infringes any trademark, patent, copyright, and other rights, or that violates any law for the time being in force, or deceives or misleads the addressee about the origin of the message, or knowingly or intentionally communicates any information that's patently false or misleading in nature, or that even impersonates another person. Similarly, your users are expected not to upload any information that's threatening the unity, integrity, sovereignty of the country, or that contains virus or computer codes that are aimed to interrupt, disrupt, limit the functionality of a computer resource, or it's patently untrue or false. Under these rules, you're now required to also ensure compliance with mandatory reporting of cybersecurity breaches as per the CERT notification and as per the CERT rules of 2013. But if you're a bigger social media intermediary, you may not be a startup, you can be a big company, then there are some additional level of compliances that the IT rules are also specifically stipulating. So let's make a lot of noise, and you need to know about this because this is something that other intermediaries also need to be prepared for. The government could ask you to provide any information to identify the origin of the information that's happened on your network. So if you're using end-to-end encryption, then there are going to be potential challenges. But these new rules are very, very problematic for some social media companies. And a lot of companies like WhatsApp and other companies are openly now challenging the constitutional validity of these rules. Now, these rules have also provided for 3 tiers of regulation: self-regulation for intermediaries. You have self-regulation at your own individual level, then at industry level, and finally at the governmental level, which is an interdepartmental committee. What happens if you don't comply with these rules? Rule 7 says, where an intermediary fails to observe these rules, the provision of Section 79 of the IT Act shall not be applicable to such an intermediary. That's the Suraksha Kavach that's given to you is going to be taken away, and the intermediary will be liable for punishment under any law for the time being in force, including the provisions of the IT Act and the rules and regulations made thereunder. So be prepared for being punished for offenses. This happens, your statutory exemption evaporates. You could be sued for unlimited damages. You could be sent to jail. If that's the window where you want to go, you can go and walk and take your own risks. But I think that's not a good idea to go forward. The good or the bad news is that the constitutional validity of these rules have already now been uploaded, have been challenged in various courts, the various high courts, and they are now examining the legal validity of the same. But as of now, when I talk, entire rules have not been stayed. Some portions have been stayed pertaining to specifically publishers of online curated content, and they're adhering to a code of conduct. But for all other intermediaries, for all provisions which apply to startups, there is no stay. So you have no choices to comply. And of course, internationally, there's some furor. There are reports where organizations are saying that these rules are not complying with global norms. So ultimately, the matter is sub judice, and we'll have to wait for the decision of the court. But please, the thumb rule learning on the horizon is very clear. If you are in India, you're using the electronic format, then you have to be prepared for compliances that the government of India has stipulated under the IT Act and the rules and regulations. If you are a startup, you are dealing with processing or handling of sensitive personal data. Clearly, you are intermediaries. There is additional level of compliances that are required to be done by you. And those additional level of compliances also don't get done, and you get exposed to criminal liability. In startups ecosystem, the startups data is very crucial, as the startup data is the part of the new data economy. And there's rapid increase in cybersecurity breaches at a global level and also in India on startup data. In India, we need to realize we don't have a dedicated law on data protection. We have a Personal Data Protection Bill 2019, which is still pending consideration of the Joint Parliamentary Committee of the Indian Parliament. And this particular bill is expected to become law very, very shortly, as and when the Parliamentary Committee comes up with its report. So as startups, you will now be required to ensure compliances with those laws as well. If as a startup you are dealing with data, then at least ensure compliances with the data protection provisions given under the IT Act and the rules and regulations made thereunder. Further, in cybersecurity, we need to understand that India does not have any dedicated law on cybersecurity. But there are various provisions on cybersecurity that are provided under the IT Act and the rules and regulations made thereunder. We also need to understand that we don't have a dedicated law on privacy, but the Supreme Court of India has already held that the right to privacy is a fundamental right in the case of Justice Puttaswamy versus Union of India. And you need to be careful of that, because that particular judgment also covers data privacy. And if you're a startup using data, you need to be mindful of the same. But then what are you expected to do as a startup? The law says, please implement reasonable security practices and procedures while you are dealing, handling, or processing third-party data. Now, your question will be, what is this reasonable security practices and procedures? The law says that these reasonable security practices and procedures are mandatory. And ISO 27001 is one example of reasonable security practices and procedures. So you don't comply with that, you don't comply with cybersecurity, still the criminal liability comes in under Rule 7 of the IT Rules 2021. So please understand, you are in a room and the room has got 5 doors. One by one, the doors are getting closed. You have no choices. You will have to ensure compliances with applicable cyber legal and cybersecurity frameworks in case if you want to do your business. Otherwise, you're going to face a flurry of litigation. And already I'm seeing that during COVID-19, there is so much of pent-up litigation that's building up. And I see a tsunami of litigation coming in the next few months and years as COVID-19 completely subsides. So please understand there are criminal exposures for offenses under the IT Act and the Indian Penal Code. apart from the risk of losing statutory exemption from legal liability, those should be a complete no-no from a startup's point of view. Because if the government is giving you benefit, why not? There are now 10 distinctive kind of cybersecurity breaches that have been notified by the government under the certain notification. If any of these 10 breaches happen on your startups, then be prepared. You have to report. You don't report, it's like a Damocles sword that's going to hang on your head. Why? Because you don't know when somebody will complain about you. And there's a 7-year-old limitation. Somebody can actually, many years later also, file a complaint against your startup saying, look, this startup had a data breach at so-and-so point of time. It chose not to report. And that's why it's committed an offense. Please prosecute the startup. So it's a different world altogether that you're waking up to. This becomes more relevant because companies, startups are increasingly being targeted by cyber attacks and ransomware attacks. This ransomware is beginning to throw up, like other cyber attacks, a variety of legal, policy, and regulatory issues and challenges. Because the biggest issue is how you identify or attribute this particular cyber attack or a ransomware attack to a particular cyber actor. Primarily because internet has made geography history, but yet our national laws are only applicable within our territorial boundaries. And when ransomware is being targeted on your systems, it's a kind of a malware that's using to digitally extort victims into payment of a specific fee. So there are various now new kinds of ransomwares that are emerging. They encrypt, they deny access to files, they restrict access or lock users out of the systems themselves. Every 11 seconds, one company anywhere in the world becomes a victim of a ransomware attack. Further, the demands of ransomware are constantly growing. So we've seen now 7-figure demands coming in, 1 million, 2 million, even 4 million. That's actually coming. Further, if you're a startup, there's a possibility you could be exploring how to delve with cryptocurrencies. Actually, some startups are saying, I'm accepting payment for my services using cryptocurrencies or crypto assets. So if you're doing with that, please realize that cryptocurrencies are actually being used for a variety of illegal activities. Further, you need to be aware of the legalities of cryptocurrencies and crypto assets in the Indian context. As of now, the Indian government has not yet made up its mind on how it wants to regulate crypto assets and cryptocurrencies. But if you are a startup, you're using blockchain, then be prepared that blockchain is also bringing forward various new cyber legal policy and regulatory issues. And as a startup, you are required to ensure at least basic compliance with these issues when you are using blockchain for the purposes of delivery of various services. But now this ransomware as a service has come up, just as cybercrime is a service. So this is going to flourish and we will be under constant attack. So therefore, you must constantly as a startup work up on the cybersecurity of your data, of your networks, so that all your effort does not go down the drain in the event there's a ransomware attack or there's a cyber attack that's targeted. But apart from attacks, we could actually find that startups are now effectively being targeted by various cyber crimes. So somebody realizes you are on some great idea as a startup. They want to hack your systems. They want to steal your data, your ideas, your drawings, your business plans, your strategies. And they want to then sell it in the open market, on the dark net or on the superficial net for a short buck. So you need to be aware of these cybercrime. You as a startup also need to protect up your intellectual property rights. That means you must have appropriate copyrights, registrations, appropriate trademark registrations. In case as a startup you've come up with something which is a new invention, then you can definitely go for a patent registration. You must also exercise your due diligence when you are dealing with intellectual property rights. I think for any startup ultimately to be successful, the foundational fulcrum principle will be cybersecurity and cyber legal challenges. If you adhere to these, apart from your core ideas, then you are definitely on a way forward. Because if you address these cyber legal and cyber security challenges, it's going to empower and strengthen the startup ecosystem. Because now we've already entered the data economy, where the data is the new oil of the data economy. And you now need to understand that these cyber disruptions will be an integral part of the data economy. So let's be prepared for these cyber disruptions and move forward in terms of trying to minimize the potential loss or damage that these cyber disruptions can cause to your startup or can cause to your data. Further, there's so much of noise happening around artificial intelligence today. Actually, a lot of maturity has come up in artificial intelligence, and AI is being used both for promoting cybercrime as also for regulating and fighting cybercrime. So AI is going to be both your friend or foe, depending on what you want to use AI for. Further, the legal frameworks for artificial intelligence are beginning to evolve. Already the state of Illinois has come up with a law on artificial intelligence. We have European Union coming up with a draft law on artificial intelligence. So if you as a startup are using artificial intelligence, please ensure that you are cognizant of the broad developments that are happening in artificial intelligence law and policy issues, because that's a rapidly changing field. As a startup, you would increasingly be using the cloud, but please realize that cloud also is going to bring forward its own legal and policy issues. And that's the reason why if a cloud goes down for some time, you need to be cognizant as to what should be your remedies and what should be the potential alternatives or redress mechanisms that will be available for you. A lot of startups today are increasingly using or accessing the Internet of Things. And now a new version of Internet of Things has come in, known as the Internet of Behavior. Now, both Internet of Things and Internet of Behavior throw forward very, very contentious cyber legal and cyber security issues. And you need to be aware of these as they come across. Already California has come up with a new law on IoT. Further, the US at the federal level has also come up with a law for promoting cybersecurity in the context of Internet of Things. Well, our face is our identity, and facial recognition is becoming more significant. So if as a startup you're using artificial intelligence or facial recognition, need to be cognizant of the legal challenges and issues, because now algorithms have come in which can even see through face masks. So these algorithms will effectively be of great deployment during the pandemic and beyond as we go forward to keep on adopting masks. Further, if you are a startup that's working on quantum computing, please realize that quantum computing is itself bringing forward various legal and policy issues which you must keep in mind as you offer your quantum computing related or powered services or offerings. And already this new paradigm seems to fire the imagination of all netizens. This is the new internet that's waiting for us. This is called the metaverse. Already there are a number of Indian startups that are working on metaverse. So if you're working on metaverse, please realize that metaverse is also bringing forward new legal, policy, and regulatory issues. And you need to be aware of these metaverse-related issues in case if you're going to be working in the context of metaverse and its connected offerings. As a startup, you must be realizing that apart from the superficial net, there is the dark net. The dark net is being used as a place for committing all kinds of cyber crimes. And you need to be cognizant of the presence of darknet and the potential headache it could have to you, because attacks could potentially be initiated from the darknet, which could be targeted on your startup, thereby making it virtually impossible to investigate as to who is behind the said attacks, or what kind of remedies can you actually have in this context. Further, if you're a startup in India and you are dealing with the data of Europeans, even in India, then please realize that you are governed under the European Union's data protection regulation known as the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation. And you have to mandatorily ensure compliance with the same. Because if you don't comply, you can actually be fined 4% of your annual global turnover as fines for non-compliance. So there's a huge cost involved. And it's always a good idea that if you're dealing with European Union or European Union citizens' data or residents' data, please ensure compliance with the GDPR. Be aware of the activities of your startup and how they're impacting privacy, and whether there are any potential legal issues or challenges coming up in this regard, because they will also become very important. During COVID-19, fear and panic were two important elements in our lives. And I was watching how COVID-19 was impacting cyberspace. So in my new book, New Cyber World Order Post-COVID-19, I've argued that by the time countries are victorious against the current and subsequent wave of COVID-19 infections, the world will enter into a new cyber age, where a new cyber world order will await us. This will be the cyber world order where states are going to become very, very powerful, where cybercrime and cybersecurity breaches will be our daily companion, where there's going to be increasing interference in the enjoyment of your digital rights, and where there could even be a migration from the superficial net onto the dark net. Look at the number of countries who have come up with laws during COVID-19, and the majority of these laws are now targeted at making this nation state's hands far more powerful. Further, as a startup company, you need to realize that with the coming of COVID-19, the golden age of cybercrime has already begun. And this golden age of cybercrime is going to be with us for the next many decades. This is a new ground reality, because the nature, the manifestations, the avatars of cybercrimes and their potential impacts that we have seen during COVID-19 have been unprecedented. New technologies are evolving, new challenges are coming forward. So if you are, as a startup, working with new technologies, please, that's a wonderful idea, but take a moment to look at what are the legal, cyber legal, and cybersecurity related ramifications, and ensure potential compliances. Why? Because if you don't do that, there could be exposure to legal consequences. I think the bottom line is very clear. As a startup, I cannot afford legal exposure. I cannot afford my top management to go to jail. I cannot afford my startup to be sued for damages up to 5 crore rupees or unlimited damages. Because if that happens and I'm asked to pay this amount of money, I will have no choice but to close my startup. So therefore, there's a need for increasing massive capacity building amongst the startups, their top managements, the middle managements, about the lurking dangers, issues, and challenges that are facing for them in the coming times. I am associated with an online platform known as Cyber Law University, called cyberlawuniversity.com, where we are offering various kinds of online courses for corporates, for enterprises. We've got various courses, including international certification courses on cyber law, cybercrime law, cybersecurity law, artificial intelligence law. Apart from a variety of short courses, we've also tied up with the National Law University at Ranchi for the purposes of offering an undergraduate cyber law certificate program. So when your courses get done by more than 26,400 students from 172 countries, speaking 52 national languages, those figures tell us a very telling story, that there's a massive need for capacity building. And I think we need to recognize that. And a lot of our courses on cyber law, cybercrime law, cybersecurity law, artificial intelligence law, blockchain law, and IoT law are aimed at helping you understand the latest cutting edge technologies and their potential legal ramifications. In this regard, we are doing this present masterclass. We are also, along Cyber Law University and Antwerp, are coming up with dedicated course or teaching program for startups, for current and future legal strategies and proactive approaches. And I think if you really want to delve deep, it will be a good idea that you should go for this kind of a course, because this program will be for startups, it will be for the top management, it will be a training program where all the startup ecosystem stakeholders will be sensitized on current and future legal strategies and proactive approaches that startup companies need to adopt in today's changing times. Further, we have also been doing various customized courses for enterprises, for organizations, corporates. Now, these are various draft courses that we have prepared for fintech companies. There's another course that we have prepared for data strategies and compliance in the data economy age. And of course, there's a separate teaching program for startups. We can customize the set programs as per the requirements of the organization, and we could potentially help deliver that. So you see, in today's world, nobody wants gyan. Nobody wants knowledge. Everybody wants, how does this impact me? And what can I do to protect myself? That's in a nutshell what we require. So these courses are going to handhold you as to what you require, what you need to be doing, and what you need to keep in mind. Because these courses will give a hands-on overview from a practical perspective to the top managements, founders, and the senior and the middle managements of enterprises, corporates, and startups. And they'll be more focused on the case study methods and approaches. Because you see, when you discuss a practical case, and then you discuss the ramifications, the positives, the negatives, what the company did, what it did not do, then your mind starts opening up. And the learnings that you learn from there remain with you for a lifetime. So one would be delighted to do any of these courses should your organizations require that. I'm available at my email address, pavan@pavandugal.com or pavandugal@yahoo.com. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any specific questions, queries, and of course, if you require any legal assistance. My law firm, Pavan Dugal Associates, which is India's niche technology law firm, working on the intersection of law and technology, would be happy to assist you, to guide you, to advise you, and to handhold you in a variety of distinctive initiatives and projects that you're going to undertake. With that, I come to the close of my presentation. I would be happy to take any specific questions that anyone may have in this regard, and we should be happy to discuss various questions. I'm going to stop my screen share, and with that, over to you, Mr. Chairperson.
Yeah, we have put an email ID on the chat box as well, because some of you might need to go back to your company and then talk about this session and get a few more people from the leadership involved. As we said, we do customized programs. So once the leadership is involved, we are going to listen into them to see exactly what's required for that company, and then create a very customized module for them. What is in line with your business need, right? So we have put an email ID, enterprise@antwork.com. Just reach out to us, or you can simply reply to the email that you got for this invite. We are going to ensure that all the queries are taken to Mr. Dugal, and a customized solution kind of meeting is organized for people who want to organize a training. We are also organizing open trainings for people, and we will keep you posted on those open trainings as and when they are launched for the enterprises. Let me take a pause here and see if there are questions. We still have around 8 to 10 minutes for this call. If there are any questions for Mr. Dugal, just Dr. Rakesh Mohanty has a question. Please go ahead, sir. Dr. Mohanty?
Sir. Yeah, good morning, sir. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Sir, it was really an awesome talk. It created a spark in my mind. So I was interested in cyber law from last few years, being a computer science professor and having a PhD in computer science from IIT Madras. But I have recently taken interest in the area of law and technology, as well as AI. So I ask you one thing, that is there any master's or PhD program for a long-term basis available in your university, which I can pursue along with my job and teaching, research and other things like that?
Thank you, Mr. Monty. We have a program known as the International Certification Course on Cyber Law. So if you're interested in law, I will seriously urge you and encourage you that you do that particular course. Why? Because it's a 12-week course. You're a working professional. You don't have much time. So in this 12 weeks, we will take you to different areas that you need to know. First and foremost, these courses have been all crafted by me. I realize that you don't have the time. You're a working professional. And therefore, under limited time, you really need to have a holistic approach of what's happening on the horizon. So each week, we give you a recorded lecture. Apart from that, each week, we'll end up giving you roughly about 40, 50 reading resources and 40, 50 video resources that you can actually peruse through, read at your own convenience. So by the end of week 12, you have substantially delved deep from a practical standpoint. None of these courses are academic Gyan courses. They are practical oriented courses as to how cyber law is going to help you in your day-to-day operations, or how you need to apply cyber law. And since cyber law now is a global phenomenon, and you're working for companies that are having global operations, you are not only required to know about the cyber legal frameworks in India, but also the broad trends in other countries. Specifically, if you're looking at, say, the US or the European Union, you need to be broadly aware as to what new cyber legal frameworks have been passed, what are the thrust areas. You see, once you do this certificate course, you're going to be substantially sensitized. And of course, there's no limit for diving deep. If you can actually do all the readings that we give you and all the viewings that we can give you, I can tell you, it opens up a new vista altogether. And it's a state of constant learning. This kind of a program is not available anywhere else, because I've looked at all the curriculum of all the cyber law courses that have been offered in India and outside. And I thought, look, what is currently missing was that practical orientation bit. Because the guys who are working today don't have the time or the luxury to close their job and to go into full-time study. But even the full-time study curriculums are only academically oriented and keeping in mind something which is 20 years old or 15 years old. Technology is changing very rapidly, and cyber legal frameworks are adopting themselves to evolving technologies. Therefore, trying to do this course is something like trying to stand on top of my shoulders to see what I can see on the horizon. And if you can see that, that's going to substantially empower you, because once you have that particular vision of what's happening, then you can specifically focus on which particular area in the cyber legal jurisprudence you want to focus on, and then you can move forward. See, actually, cyber law as a discipline has massively evolved. And from just becoming a vertical specific discipline, it's become a mother discipline, where various sub-disciplines are evolving under the broad umbrella of cyber law. So under cyber law, you have cybercrime law, you have cybersecurity law, you have artificial intelligence law, you have blockchain law, you have IoT law. So depending on what your convenience is, this is what I will actually recommend, because this is, again, practically oriented. If you want to have practical stuff, and since I have crafted these courses, I've known specifically what you would require, and I put that in those courses. So that could be a good starting point as you go forward. Thanks.
Sir, just a minute. Actually, I have a long-term plan for it. Like, for example, setting up a research lab, really doing some experiential learning, then collaborating with court cases and other things like that, so that we can also help people, and people can do research on that under me, like PhD and other kind of stuff. So both academic as well as your day-to-day life practical application, but I want to incorporate into that. And before that I dive into that particular area, I must develop an expertise, and I can offer a course on that also in academics, and maybe an optional or elective course for the computer science students whom I'm teaching in master's or BTech level. Similarly, I want to do a little bit of research on this, and actually I want to continue. I'm really passionate about the cyber laws and other stuffs from last 5 or 6 years. I'm studying here and there, and this is the first lecture I'm attending from you, and really it's motivational, because so many things you have covered in a very short duration of time. Amazing, actually. Thank you, sir. Thank you. We'll talk offline, and I will also shoot a mail to you, and then we can move ahead from there.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure talking. Please connect with me. We'll be happy to see how we can work offline. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions, please?
Shirish, I think, has a question. Shirish, can you go forward?
Good afternoon, sir. I am myself Dr. Srish Kumar Tiwari from Central University of Gujarat, sir. There is a very basic question about the career aspect of cyber law. This is a general perception by adopting this course. Only law or court are the single domain, single area where we can get job. Can you tell me that various new proposed prospects, job prospects areas where our students can seek job?
Cyber law, sir, is an evolving discipline. So there are n number of job opportunities that are now opening up for people who are working in cyber law. So let me give you some of these options. One, of course, is you can become a cyber lawyer. You can start practicing cyber law. You can advise clients, fight their cases in courts. And mind you, I see a tsunami of cyber legal litigation that's going to emerge by the end of COVID-19. So with this huge potential cases that are going to come in, I think that's a wonderful option. Further, you could also be in in-house counsel, because today companies want to engage those in-house counsels who are familiar with cyber law, because everything has become digital. The coming of COVID-19 has shown us it's all digital. And therefore, as a lawyer, you need to know about the digital nuances. You could be a consultant. You could actually go into academic research. You can go and teach in various universities and institutions. You can do further academic studies therein. You can also undertake various cyber law projects, because different governments have now started offering various cyber law projects where they require expertise of cyber lawyers. Because this kind of a work cannot be done by normal lawyers or by normally technical people. So that opens up a new vista. Further, at the international level, there are immense number of new job openings. International organizations, UN organizations are now wanting to recruit those people who have got orientation or who got substantial knowledge in cyber law, so that these guys can be well tuned with the digital law realities and could potentially advise those respective organizations. Further, there's a lot of public advocacy that's begun to start coming in. You could be involved in public advocacy organizations as a full-time job. You could also be involved in non-governmental organizations who are specifically working on the legal and policy issues that impact the internet. You could also work with international, regional, and national organizations that are focusing on some aspect or the other of the digital ecosystem. And that's a huge ecosystem that we are talking of. So there are n number of opportunities. And now with the new technological developments coming in, with artificial intelligence coming in, I think the sky is going to be the limit. For example, now a lot of Indian companies have begun to start using AI, but they're clueless on the legal and the policy issues. So they can either take your advice as a cyber lawyer to advise them on the artificial intelligence legalities, or they can take you as an in-house counsel or as an in-house consultant, or they can take you on a project. So there are n number of opportunities. You could write, you could speak, you could teach, you could advise, you could evangelize, you could potentially do a lot of things. So I see a huge vista of opportunities opening up for anyone who's working on cyber. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Perfect. I think we're almost done with the time. Any last question? Otherwise,
yes, sir.
Ramesh,
This is
go ahead.
so this is me, Kaushik. So first off, I'd like to thank you for have come on our platform, because this is our first topic around cyber law, and it's gained a lot of traction, and it's kind of creating a lot of sparks and interest in this conversation. So thank you so much for giving us that much of knowledge and wisdom around. So I just have a question which is kind of two-part. The first part is that like GDPR and other laws in other countries, which does favor a lot of citizens as well when it comes to their own data, how effective will IT Act 2000 become in the near future for India? And number two, if a student doesn't have any sort of knowledge around law, but has been in the cybersecurity industry, how difficult will it be for him or her to transition into cyber law as a career?
Thanks, Kaushik, for this question. The Indian cyber law has been with us last 21 years. Mind you, it's a law that we enacted in the year 2000. It only got amended once in 2008. As of now, it's crying for amendments. And the good news is that the government is already now working on new provisions to amend the IT Act. So as of now, it's not very effective. But the problem is it's India's mother legislation. Anything to do with electronic format, and you're covered under the IT Act. And because the IT Act is a special law, Section 81 of the IT Act says that the provisions of this law prevail over anything inconsistent therewith, contained in any other law for the time being in force. So whether you like it or not, this is the only law that you will have to comply with, and you must comply. Otherwise, my practical experience under the Indian IT law tells me that it's like a whirlpool. Once you get sucked into a whirlpool, it's going to get you very, very difficult and a lot of time and energy to get out of the whirlpool. So if you get exposed to legal consequences under the IT Act, it could potentially take you a number of years to get out of the same. So, and now with new amendments coming in, with the new IT rules 2021 that have already come in, the landscape is now changed. The criminal liability is now an essential element. So we must now be aware of that. Number two, your question regarding a student who hasn't done cyber law, but who's in cybersecurity, automatically is now going to be required to know the basic nuances of cyber law. Why? Because if you're working on cybersecurity and you don't know what the law is requiring you to do, then potentially that's going to create challenge, because your potential employer or your current employer is going to potentially put you to fire to say, hold on, you're into cybersecurity, you don't even know this, and this is something which is mandatory. So in order to enhance your skill sets, it'll be wonderful if you can, while you're working in cybersecurity, also have broad landscape knowledge as to what is the broad provisions on cyber law. You don't need to be a subject matter expert, but you must need to have working knowledge, so that when you're doing your day-to-day working within your organization, that could be a good starting point for your purposes. Because today, ultimately, everything is converging. Earlier, we thought cyber law was different, cybercrime is different, cybersecurity is different. Now, all of them have converged. Any element of a cyber act done in cyberspace by a cyber actor is potentially going to have a cyber legal ramification, a cyber crime ramification, or a cybersecurity ramifications. Therefore, if you don't know the appropriate legal ramifications or the other security ramifications of the cyber acts, your decision making is not going to be that intelligent. And somewhere down the line, it could potentially impact you, your work, and your potential business prospects. So I'll actually encourage everybody who's working in any area of cybersecurity, please have working knowledge of cyber law. Don't be masters, but let's have knowledge of the working principles, so that to the extent that cyber law applies to your day-to-day business operations or your job or your activity,